Ryan Hodgson here, Air Force Velocity Stacks. I'd like to introduce you to Don Galloway, Racing Hall of Fame inductee 2021, and tell us a little bit about yourself, Don.
Yeah, racing inductee. Well, your father is responsible for having me inducted into the Western Canadian Motorsports Hall of Fame, and I kind of fit, kind of a category or a circle category, I guess it would be. We're all inclusive because I've had the pleasure of being involved in motorsports most of my adult life, and I got into it initially racing motocross, and I was a good mechanic, so it kind of fit my character. But that led to owning my own business with Ed McDonald Cycle Works. So I raced snowmobiles, motorcycles, ATVs, watercraft, hill climbed, cross country. All kinds of things, so.
Right.
And then I've had I've also built race motors for all kinds of championship winning individuals and snowmobiles and go-karts and motocross and cross country. So I'm kind of, fit the whole bill as far as, promoter, track operator, sponsor.
Right.
And so consequently, I've got quite a background in it, but, you and I've got to know each other. Ron's 10 years younger than me. You guys are like 10 years, or Ron's 10 years older, you're 10 years younger, and I fit in between you, but I've gotten to know you lately because of our interest in motor tuning.
Right.
And I really don't know much about your success racing, but...
Well, we started off, when we were young kids, right? First thing that happened was, I remember growing up at the racetrack, Speedway Edmonton. My dad had bought an acreage down the road so we could get the speedway really quick, and one day we walked up from our tree fort, and sitting at the end of the path was a KX80 and a CR80, and that began this whole chain of events where we would race motorcycles. My brothers would race motorcycles, we raced pedal bikes, and then we raced sprint cars, and then we raced nitro funny cars and alcohol funny cars, and the list just goes on. My brother was racing the Baja, and then over the years we built so many different engine combinations and raced so many different sports. We were racing the Num Bum all the time, and we learned just a massive amount, compared to the average guy. And when we started racing these nitro funny cars, Dad had done it his whole life, and I'd started about 10 years ago, and my knowledge picked up a lot on the engines and how they worked, right? Because
you're tuning against 50 other guys in the pits for a fraction of a second, right?
And the best tuners in the world, right?
Yes.
And so what happens on a weekend is that if we make it to the finals, we'll get to do 8 passes, right? And so we'll build 8 different engine combinations in one weekend. And when we do that, we're changing the time and the compression, the blower, everything in the engine, and it's an engine. So a motorcycle has an engine, right? And the stuff I learned from tuning motorbikes works in the nitro car, and what I learned from tuning the nitro car works in the motorbikes, right? And when we race these nitro funny cars, one of the most important things is the weather and the air that gets into the cylinder. And then that's how we developed this Air Force Velocity Stack, right? I was looking at these engines going, there must be more to them. C3 had an intake which worked really good, it shedded the snow, and then I'm looking at it going, well, maybe we could improve this, and I started buying everybody's intake in the industry, and everybody had something that shedded snow, but I wanted something that shedded snow and it increased horsepower. So as crazy as I am...
Curious, we'll call you curious.
Curious, yeah. Curious as I am, I ended up getting every engine combination there was. And I took every engine to the dyno, and I actually built maybe thousands of stacks, right? And I'd put them on and see what they did. I would change the diameter, change the lengths, do this, do that, and it basically overtook my life. I'm watching NASA videos, learning physics, watching airplane wings and birds and how they fly, and learning vortexes and studying the wind traveling across buildings. And lo and behold, I ended up with a design that really rams the air into the cylinder. And what it's doing is it's filling the cylinder more because of the velocity, right? But if you don't have it right, it doesn't work. So that's why I have a different stack for every different bike and every different engine combination.
Well, that's how you and I've landed up talking more in the last 6 months and the last 30 years, because I got I understand that the things that I built, normally I'm building something to last a long time, but there's what can you do that will make a significant difference that is already sitting on the bike,
right?
And is there kind of as a gift, and a lot of times the manufacturers create a motorcycle like the bikes we're dealing with are manufactured with certain parameters, there are certain applications, but the intake, I've found out talking to you and spending time with you is a huge gift if you spend time with it, right?
Yeah, so you need to utilize the gain. Like, so there's also the cam that's in effect. And so what I found out is that a lot of times we put these cams in the bikes and they just come up a little bit in power, or you're like, did it work or didn't it work? But what you have to do, if you got more duration or you have more lift, it's just opening, right? But you need to fill it. You need to utilize that. So when the air comes in, it's filling the cylinder. You're taking advantage to your lift or your duration. You're utilizing it. So they call it efficient engine, right?
Yeah. Well, I know over the years, whether it's a 2-stroke or a 4-stroke motor, the question is, what do you do first? We used to be able to bolt on a set of pipes on a triple Polaris, and you get 30 horsepower. Like, we wouldn't have to do much more than jet it a little bit and away you go. But today, with the efficiencies of the engine, that what do you do first? And so what we found then is, the intake tract is really what has been left on the table.
Well, that's where you start, yeah, and it has been left on the table. And like when I talk to guys, they'd spent 30 years working on the exhaust side of the motor. But I learned through drag racing, right?
Yeah, right.
That it's the air. It's the air you're mixing with the nitro or the alcohol to create the massive horsepower, right? And like, fuel makes power, and the intake makes power. That's what I found, right? If you can get that combination correct, your horsepower is going to increase. Like last week, we made, I think, 9 horsepower by playing with fuel and intakes. But I got hundreds of intakes here, right?
On a modern engine,
try,
like something that theoretically has been engineered, like the knowledge of 100 and whatever years of internal combustion engine should be in that thing, and they've left it on it. And I know I found out just in the last year or so, we used to, when we did a motor, we put in bigger exhaust valves. When we did bigger intake valves, I go, like, you find out that the exhaust can usually look after itself pretty well.
Right.
You play around with the intake, bigger intake valve, bigger carburetor, and now I've lately learned that what's on the other side of the carburetor on the way in makes a huge difference.
Right. And so what the stack is doing is it's creating more torque. And so more torque is what turns the tracks in these snow bikes, right? And so on the top end, it moves all the power lower, right? So if you run my stacks, you're going to have more power from the bottom to about 8,000 RPM. So my brother, he went out and he had a data logger, right? And he data logged his bike, and he rode for about 5 days in the mountains, and he found out that, to his surprise, he never rides over 7,500 RPM. He's got the 520 KTM, and he just baw all day, and he gets after it. When he gets after it, he goes to 7,800 RPM, right? So I'm like, this can't be true, right? So I put a tack on my bike. I think the tack's broken. I'm like, there's no way. So I bring it back to the guys in the shop. I'm like, the tack doesn't work. It doesn't get over 7,000 RPM. This can't be real. Work on the tack, go it again, 7,500, 7,800. I'm like, the tack's broken. So I phoned Kevin at C3. Kevin's like, yeah, man. He says, I've been data logging these bikes all year, writing ECU programs, trying to figure out different tuning, power curves, and all this stuff. And he says, the only way I can get my bike up to 9,000 RPM is if I hold it in second gear in a logging road, and I should have shifted a long time ago. The whole world thinks that they ride the crap out of these bikes, and Kevin is a rider. He's always right to the bars, right? If you don't shift in first gear, but you ride at 7,500 RPM.
Yeah, well, so I get it then. You've this intake tract, which would be very beneficial to that snow bike guys. It would cross over to anybody that, the average rider. You buy a motocross bike, ththese guys buy these 450s and 500s, and the power that you're producing is going to be useful to anybody, because it'll be in this area that they normally ride in. And so your intake track, which you've been working on, for use in snow bikes, like you have an application for dirt also, right?
Yeah, I worked with Unifilter, and they came up with a filter that goes over the existing cage we have on these stacks. I don't suggest riding in the dirt, but if you were to race on asphalt or just motocross racing, when you come out of the corners, you need torque, right? That's what's going to get you ahead, because the motor's always got to travel through the power curves, right? And any kind of circle track racing or anything, you're going to need that torque to come out of the corners. If you had a faster bike through first, second, third, and fourth on a drag race, you're going to win the race, right? And what happens is when the torque all comes down and you're not revving the crap out of your motor all the time, the longevity of the motor, the life of the motor is a lot longer.
Yes, great.
Right? So it's been really interesting, all these testings and testimonials and people testing the stacks on dynos across the US. And everybody's been really happy with the stack. I only had 2 guys say, I don't know, but man, that's like 99.8% success rate. Eric K down at the racing station, he says anybody that buys the stack and doesn't like it, doesn't think it works, we will give your money back. Oh, that's pretty strong right there, right? He's never had one guy send the stack back.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, well, making usable power, almost anybody could benefit from that, because again, the average rider you're not riding at 14,000 RPM all day.
Right.
Well, that's very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks for watching. See you on the hills.